And the same thing can be said about depression. It's not something that we say, well, I'm going to take this medication, or I'm going to do this, pray more, or whatever, and I'm never going to have to suffer with it again. That's not true. It might be true in some circumstances, but it won't be true in all circumstances. Because, number 5, depression is not the same in all situations. It is very much individualized to each person. Myth number 6. Depression is completely genetic. That's not true. It might be. But we don't know in every person's situation. Number 7. Depression is situational. That's not necessarily true either. If it's situational, then the reasoning is, well, I can get out of that situation and I'll stop being depressed. But that's not true. It might be, but it might not. Myth number 8, depression is a chemical imbalance. Again, that might be true in some situations, and if that's the case, then the individual needs to go to a medical doctor, a psychiatrist, and receive some medication for it. But getting a chemical fix isn't the answer to all of the depression that people experience. Myth number 9, depression can be cured by using only medication. Clearly, medication could be the answer for some people, but it's not the answer for everybody. And then myth number 10, depression can be permanently cured, and again, that's not always true. In fact, it might not be true at all. And people who suffer from depression. So, what can we do? What's the solution? First of all, clearly, paying attention to our health is a key factor. We can get depressed because we don't have any energy. And having poor health can cause us not having energy. The research is unquestionable that getting, say, 30 minutes a day of moderate exercise, taking a daily walk 30 minutes a day, has an impact on the hormones in our body and how our body feels and reacts. Now again, that might not be the solution to all of the depression that we experience, but it may be a good place to start. Sometimes we think, well, my mental state is over here, my spiritual state is over here, my physical state is over here, and there's not really a connection between them. But that's not how God designed our bodies. Our spiritual is affected by our mental, is affected by our physical. And we have to look at our body holistically like that, because that's the way God designed us. Number 2, we need to get behind the scenes. That is, we need to examine ourselves honestly and carefully and ask ourselves, what is it that's causing me to feel depressed? Psychologists will say, keep a daily journal or a weekly journal, even a daily mood journal, and ask yourself, why am I depressed right now? What is it that has happened to me today or yesterday, recently, that has caused me to feel depressed? You see, that's where we have to know ourselves. And we have to honestly examine ourselves and find out what is it that's making me feel this way. Number 3, and I think this is a big key for a lot of us, we need to get control of our thinking. Sometimes we suffer from stinking thinking, negative thinking, pessimistic thinking, and we need to get control of it. When we find ourselves thinking, I can't accomplish anything good, I am worthless, I have nothing to contribute, we need to stop ourselves right there and say, that is not true. God made me as an individual. He made me unique. I may not be able to do what somebody else can do, but I am somebody because God don't make no junk. And we need to remind ourselves of that we do have something to contribute. And I am important. You know, if you are affected with that type of thinking sometimes, maybe you need to watch the movie It's a Wonderful Life. It's a Wonderful Life, and ask yourself, what would have happened if I had never been born? How many people would be affected if I were ever born? We need to get control of our thinking and think more faithfully and optimistically. Number 4, write down things that are good that we like about ourselves. And they ought to include 3 things that we like about ourselves physically. That's one of the things that we sometimes are most depressed about. You know, getting middle-aged, that middle-aged spread. Well, I start getting depressed over that. Write write down 3 things that you like about yourself physically, 10 things that you like about yourself. And then pray over it. And thank God for it. See, that has to do with the previous point. Changing the way we think. And appreciating who we are and how God has designed us. Number 5, remember that few things are really hopeless and few situations are really bad. Things are rarely as bad as we tend to think. Things are rarely as bad as we expect. Fear is false events appearing real. F-E-A-R. And sometimes that's how we think. We think negatively. We think things are going to turn out awful, and rarely they turn out as bad as we sometimes think. Number 6, find social support. You know, when you're depressed, one of the initial reactions is, I want to withdraw. I want to withdraw myself. I want to get away from people. And psychologists will say that's one of the worst things you can do. One of the worst things we can do is become isolated socially, because we are not creatures designed to be isolated socially. And it exacerbates the problem. It gives us an opportunity to continue thinking negatively. It provides an opportunity for us to wallow in our self-pity and misery. And so we need to find social support. We need to seek out the friends that we have that are encouragers. We need to talk to them. We need to spend time with them. We need to spend time with people who seem to be perpetually happy, and allow some of that happiness and optimism to rub off on us and help us change our thinking. So if you find yourself in that situation, don't isolate yourself. It's the wrong thing to do. But find support. Find people who are encouragers. Number 7, don't forget spiritual issues. Are you like David, who had secret sin, and it bothered him and bothered him and bothered him until he confessed it? Find somebody to confess it to. Find forgiveness from God. Find support from God and encouragement from God. If it's spiritual causes, then deal with it spiritually. Does the love of Christ control your life? One reason why I think we suffer from depression sometimes is because we focus on ourselves. Why do we think negatively about ourselves? Because we're thinking about ourselves. And our thoughts are not centered around God, and our lives are not centered around God. And when our lives are centered around ourselves and our thoughts are centered around ourselves, then we have a very small world. And that's why we see all the negative, because we say, well, I can't do. Well, maybe I'm not designed to do. Maybe I need to wait on God. Maybe I need to have more faith in God. We need to make sure our lives are centered around God and not others. I want to conclude by presenting some thoughts from the Bible. Clearly, Elijah is a great example of a faithful child of God who suffered from depression. Elijah, in fact, suffered so greatly that he also wanted to end his life. He didn't want to end his own life, he wanted God to do it. Elijah, Job, and Jeremiah. All 3 of them wish they'd never been born. And those are 3 of the most faithful men in the Old Testament. Elijah had a mountain peak experience in chapter 18 of 1 Kings. That's when he challenged the 400 prophets of Baal. Call down fire from heaven to your God, and maybe he'll burn up your sacrifice. They called to their God all day long. Cut themselves in order to get their God's attention. And their God didn't respond, of course, because their God doesn't exist. Elijah doused his sacrifice with water. A dozen gallons of water filled up the ditch that he had built around his altar, and he prayed to the God of heaven, the true God, and God sent down fire and burned up everything. Elijah had a great experience there. Elijah won that contest. But then when Queen Jezebel said, before this day is over, you're going to be just like those prophets, Elijah got scared. And Elijah ran for his life. And he ran some more. And he ran some more. And he wound up getting to Mount Horeb, physically exhausted, starving to death, and depressed. reason why Elijah found himself in a situation where he says, God, take my life. I'm the only one left. He was having this negative thinking because of all of these other factors. So we need to look at Elijah and see what is it about Elijah that can be an encouragement to me. We need to recognize that life has its normal ups and downs. Life is not entirely a valley, but life is also not entirely a mountain peak experience. Now I go on vacation and I have a mountain peak experience. And we have a baptism and I have a mountain peak experience. And we have Vacation Bible School and I have a mountain peak experience. And I go to the lectureship and I have a mountain peak experience. But guess what? Life doesn't stay up there. At some point, I'm going to come back down. Now, people who look for encouragement in alcohol or drugs, what they're trying to do is stay on that mountain peak experience. They're trying to avoid those letdowns that are a part of life. So you and I need to recognize, if I'm up here, one day I'm going to come down. But I also need to recognize if I'm down here, I'm going to come back up. It's just a part of life, the normal ebb and flow of life. And of course, Elijah's depression was also physically caused, and so God fed Elijah with the ravens. God allowed Elijah to have rest. And then God said, Elijah, get up and get to work. Go anoint Elisha as another prophet to help you carry on your work. I want you to anoint Jehu as king of Israel. I want you to anoint Hazael as king of Syria. I want you to get to work. You've had enough time thinking about yourself. You've wallowed in your own misery, your own self-pity long enough. Now get up and work. That was God's prescription to Elijah. And that might be God's prescription for us. Another thing is the passage that Sid read for us earlier, Psalm 42 and verse 5. Now that's the psalm where he begins with verse 1, as the deer pants for the water, so my soul longs after you. And notice again he says in verse 5, why are you in despair, O my soul? You see, he's having a talk to himself. You see where his thoughts are directed to himself. O my soul, why are you in despair, O my soul, and why have you become disturbed within me? He's talking to himself. He's carrying on a conversation with himself. And then he says, hope in God, for I shall again praise Him. So he recognizes that his depression, in particular, was spiritually caused. And he says, I need to go back hoping in God and realizing that God is going to take care of it. Write down these verses. Romans 8, verse 28. God works all things together for our good, for those who are called according to His mercy. God works all things together for our good. For somebody who is not a Christian and they have a number of bad things happening to them, I think, how are you going to get through that? How are you going to get through that when you don't believe that you have anybody up there who cares about you? But see, that's not what the Bible teaches for us Christians. God works all things together for our good. So if I've had a series of bad things happening to me, when it feels like there's a great cloud following me around, I've got the promise from God that He's going to work everything out all right. He's going to take care of things. And I need to remind myself of that. Matthew 6 and verse 11. This is what we call the Lord's Prayer. The disciples' prayer really is teaching the disciples how to pray. And that's the verse where Jesus says, I want you to pray, give us this day our daily bread. If Jesus wants us to depend on Him each day for our food, maybe I need to pray to God and say, God, give me this day my daily peace of mind. Give me this day my daily dose of optimism. Let me handle today, God. Let me handle today. Sometimes we encourage people, just handle it one day at a time. How much truth is there in that? Jesus says, Matthew 6, verse 11, handle one day at a time. Don't worry about tomorrow. Let God take care of